Tessa, I'm really pumped about this conversation. What you do day to day is the stuff I think about quite often. So I appreciate you carving out the time to do this.
Of course, happy to be here.
Okay, before we dive into the book and all things content related, there, I wanted to start off what I thought would be a kind of like a fun, cool exercise, just touching on some career myths and just getting your thoughts, like whatever it might be. No right or wrong answer, but a couple of them. One of them being people don't leave jobs, they leave bad bosses. When you hear that, like, is there a lot of truth to that, or what do you think?
I think people think they're leaving a bad boss, but they're often kind of not honest about all the other things that are actually kind of piling on to a relationship. It's a little like saying, I left my marriage because my partner cheated on me or I caught them having an affair. That might be the salient thing in the moment, leading you to leave. But there's probably about 500 other things that kind of also built up to the point where you disliked your boss, or in this metaphor, someone cheated. So I think, often we kind of cling to one relationship at work and then sort of blame this, crumbling house on that.
So, what about when you hear people say, follow your passion, right? Not that it's right or wrong, but like, what is your thought when you hear that phrase?
I hear existential crisis when I hear that phrase, because most people don't actually have a passion, or if they do, it is not at work. I think there are a select few people who feel truly passionate about their jobs or ever find something that they are both highly identified with and satisfied with that identity at the same time. I think passion is a concept that we throw around a lot, but we don't actually really know what that means. And I think one of the reasons why people freak out about their careers and jobs is because they don't feel like they're living up to some super high standard of what passion is. And, I use a lot of relationship metaphors in my work, but it's sort of like believing that every marriage needs to be like hot and sexy the entire time. Well, there's fluxes and flows of passion. And I think that's normal. I think it's okay to have moments where you have ennui at work, where you're a little bit bored. You don't always need to feel excitement and passion to have a career that's fulfilling for you. So I think it's just a real tall order to try to live up to some passion goal that you have at work.
Is it fair to say that you should at least like your job, and then the passion can be filled by hobbies and things like that, or whatever that might be?
Yeah, I think that we should all like our jobs. We should all not feel stressed at work. But kind of one thing that's really interesting that I thought about as I was writing this book is not everyone actually needs to be identified with their career. Not everyone needs to get their sense of self from their career. A lot of people do, but not all of them do. And I think one part of this journey that's really important is actually figuring out how much identity centrality you want, which is kind of this academic jargon word of saying it is important to my sense of self-concept. It is important to sort of like who I am or not. A lot of people are fine with a 9 to 5 that they don't love. And that's okay. What you need to care about is the mismatch between the career expecting you to have that and your own personal feelings about that. I've worked for companies, I used to sell shoes, where you're supposed to have a core part of your identity is that organization. And those that were just sort of there to make money felt really uncomfortable because there was a huge
Mm,
mismatch between these two things.
interesting. Yeah, that's we should definitely double click on that. I think we'll go through kind of the frustrations that you've studied. I think that's kind of maybe the most important part of this conversation coming up.
Yeah.
One of the questions I often ask people, I was thinking about this, and I'd love for you to answer the question too, but maybe even more importantly, I've been asking this question to, I don't know, 100 interviews, a lot of people. I get a lot of responses to
Yeah.
this. It's maybe one of the most fascinating responses I usually get, and it's in the beginning of every interview. And I ask people, so we'll take a step back on the question. What did your parents do for a living, and how did that impact some of the life and career choices you've made? You
Yes.
never, right? And you never get the same response for whatever reason. It might be a CEO of a company or a founder of a company, and it's almost like they've never really been asked that question, and it forces them to really kind of think about it, because it's not about what they did. It's how did that like the sort of meat of it comes from how did that impact some of the choices you've made. And so I'm wondering, I'd love for you to answer the question, and then like, from the people that I know for the latest book, I'm not sure if it was a lot of recruiters that were studied or just job seekers or both, but like,
Both, yeah.
but okay. And this might not be the thing that you're like asking people, but I'm curious in your work, like, how do you see what someone's parents did for a living impact sort of the way they view the world? Because I do think it kind of, you see it through a different lens. It'll get reshaped over time by other
Yeah.
people you meet and experiences. But what do you think about
Yeah.
that?
I've thought a lot about this. I'm a psychologist. I've done leadership training where the first thing they did was talk to us about what our parents did for a living and how that shaped our leadership,
Really?
experiences.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts about this. My dad owned a construction company that went bankrupt, and we were not financially stable growing up. And so most of the time we actually were losing more money than we were making. He was an aspiring business owner with very little business experience. And so that was pretty stressful. My mom worked for special needs kids from birth to 3. So she had a stable kind of state job, working for Head Start. And I grew up in Southern California. So my mother's income was kind of the stable part, but my dad had this sort of aspirational career of having a business. And so, I spent a lot of time on construction sites. I could tell you all about drywalling. And I grew up thinking that like everyone had giant bags of concrete in a wheelbarrow in their backyard, like 2x4s and wires and stuff like that. I think the main thing I learned from this, I grew up pretty financially unstable. And, we had people knocking on our door all the time asking for money, subcontractors, the government. We were one of those families that like hid our cars on the street over in case like the repo guy came. So, I think growing up with fairly unstable finances made me really want to cling to a super stable career. And, I went to graduate school kind of right out of undergrad. I just went on a straight and narrow path, and I didn't explore a lot of careers. I was terrified of exploration because I didn't have this, financial background where my parents could bail me out at any time. I paid for college, I had 3 jobs and things like that. And so for me, this idea of exploration of a career or having an identity crisis after putting so much effort into your job and wanting to leave, that would have been really horrifying for me. And I think there are a lot of people with my background who've worked really hard to get to where they are. And when they do have things like identity crises at work, they think back on their families like, God, there's no way. I mean, my parents would ever have approved of me at this point, spending this much money on my education. I would have been shamed into submission to staying. And that's definitely shaped how I think about my own career, but also the advice I give other people who have similar backgrounds. I think this is true for immigrants as well. When they come here, and one of the people I interviewed in job therapy is first generation Korean, and her parents were like, you cannot leave academia. That's insane. Like, why would you do that? You know how hard it was for us to get you here and to get you through graduate school and so forth. So I think it's not so much what my parents did, but the instability of our income growing up that has like really shaped everything.
It makes me think also a little when you talk about like identity. I was reading Ali Abdal's book, who writes and like YouTube's about productivity and just there was this really interesting interview he did with Lewis Howes where it was like an interview that got really deep and like went really deep on about his identity attachment to being a doctor. And like he was
Yeah.
spending a couple hours a month now. It was almost like him being a doctor was a side hustle to supplement,
Yeah.
his productivity career, which is great. And it's grown. And it was just really fascinating to see how that flipped, but also for him to kind of take stock of that and also think about, he's taking someone's place just so he has an identity attachment to being in medicine when someone else could be doing that full time. Whatever that means.
Yeah, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame, there's a
Yeah.
lot of ambivalence around your feelings, I think. And ambivalence is a normal part of this as well. And I think a lot of people just aren't used to feeling that way about their careers. I love it, I hate it. I love this part, I hate this part. I'm bored, I'm excited, kind of all within one moment. And then you end up with people like this who have an insane career that they're kind of framing as not their core identity, but their side hustle to do the thing they actually love. And I sort of joke that I side hustle as a professor to write books.
Yeah.
I don't write books as a side hustle, the professor part, depending on which identity is salient at any given time.
That's funny. Were your parents telling you when you think back, maybe before you went to college or when you were in college, did they sort of guide you with this safe, like, pursue this career or that career, what were they telling you?
They were saying, this is probably like a little bit TMI, but they were saying you need to make your own money so that you don't ever have to rely on a man to make it for you. So their messaging was, we don't care what you do as long as it's stable and as long as you can take care of yourself. That way, I mean, I remember talking to my dad when I was like 8, whatever you do, you can't become dependent upon another person to take care of you. Like, you don't want to be stuck in a crappy marriage because of financial reasons. And I took that to heart, and I ended up, becoming very stable and getting divorced and getting remarried. But I think their main message was that you want security. It wasn't that they wanted me to be rich, they wanted me to be secure. And so there was a lot of jobs that did not fall under that, business starter, new venture, anything. And so it was just like very much like a safety bias around kind of the career lectures that I got growing up.
Interesting. Okay. One of the things I noticed in the back of your book, you think your book agent, Nat, I get, it goes by Nat. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of caught my attention is that you said that he kind of influenced your half-baked ideas or something like that. It sounds like he was someone who's like a sounding board for you. And I'm just curious if you can share, like, how does he influence your work?
Yeah, I got super lucky with my agent, Nat Jax, because he actually came to me and approached me before I even thought about writing a book. And so when I wrote Jerks at Work, I did not know what I was doing. I had never thought about writing a trade book before. And it took us like a year of doing a proposal. And one thing that's great about him is I would have kind of a seed of an idea, and then he would sort of push me in a certain direction that he thought would be sellable, but without kind of framing it that way, because as an academic, you don't really think, what's the market for this? Who's my audience? You're just like, where's the research? What's rich? And I can back it up. And so he would kind of subtly push me in this direction of, but this is too vague, or this is half baked. He's the one that really kind of came up with this framework of typology and kind of pushed me to do that. And he also really influenced the way I write. And so I think when you're
Tell me
coming
about that.
from
Yeah.
one career, when you're coming kind of from one career where there's certain norms, there's kind of a hidden curriculum of how to do it. And in academia, there's a certain type of writing you do. It takes you a long time to figure out how to actually have voice, because we're taught to kind of sort of like take the piss out of our voice, so to speak.
Yeah.
You don't want to be colloquial. You don't want to use first person. You don't want to say things like, I believe, I think, I feel in academic writing. And so, but then the result is, for a trade book, you need storytelling. You need to be more casual. You need to actually kind of talk. You need to write like how you talk, or the reader's going to be a little bit lost that there's two voices, the one that's on the podcast and the one that's in the book. And so he actually made me comfortable being a little raunchy and talk and writing the way that I actually talk. And he really instilled in me, like, you need to actually do that, because you're going to feel stiff and weird if you're disingenuine in your actual writing voice when it comes time to actually promote this thing. So, and he gave me kind of a license to be like, swear in the book if you want to swear in the book. My book proposal was Dicks at Work, and that actually got shot down. It was coming off of Me
That's
Too.
funny. Yeah.
And he's like, this isn't a Me Too book. Everyone's going to think it's a Me Too book. And also in Russian, Dicks doesn't translate well. So,
That's funny.
so there
Like,
was a level of raunchiness that he sort of had to get rid of a little bit, but I think he really encouraged me to like write like I talk, and I do. It's one of the reasons why I don't use chatbot for any of my writing, because it just doesn't sound like me. It's like, no one will believe
that's funny.
that was me. Yeah, so I have a lot, and I still meet with him, and I still bounce ideas off of him all the time. And he's super thoughtful and great. I'm super lucky to have him.
That's really cool. I think there's so much we can learn about how someone was influenced by other people to write a book. In the acknowledgments, like, if if you dig in there a little bit, there's so many cool stories and people to thank and that we can learn from. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
One of the other things, I feel like sometimes you get in a position where it's hard to be surrounded by people that'll tell you the truth. And so it sounds like he's somebody that will. So that's really cool.
Yeah, he definitely does. And my editors too. And I think, this whole problem of niceness is a real issue. I think it's very hard to get like specific critical feedback, and editors too will tiptoe around you, because a lot of authors are pretty, they're precious.
Mm.
They have egos, they're fragile, they don't like being told that they're going in a weird direction or that they just submitted 500 pages of junk, and I think having someone who feels comfortable enough to keep it real with you and give you the feedback of like, this story doesn't work, I take that as a huge compliment that I've done something right to make an editor or an agent or whoever feel comfortable. Because I thought coming into this, I would get a ton of harsh feedback, but instead I actually get like pretty nice feedback, and I've had to push people on being a little bit meaner. But,
That's cool.
I also grew up with like, my dad was in the military. So this like mean part, this like critical, what matters is the time and that people invest in the feedback, not whether it's nice or not. And so
Yeah.
kind of just reminding the people I train and also the people, who give me feedback, like, I can tell you put a lot of time into this. Yeah, it kind of hurt my feelings, but like, that was a lot of effort you just put in. And I super appreciate that. And I'm going to, take it seriously and so forth.
So let me pivot. I wasn't going to go here yet, but you gave a TED talk a little while ago. And I think the thesis really was it's about being honest versus just being nice and like striking that balance in terms of giving feedback. I'm curious, what was that response like after you gave the talk? What did people say to you?
Well, I tried to do a couple exercises in the actual audience to like make people uncomfortable and feel it. I'm married to a Canadian, so I'm very well versed
Super
in this
nice.
sort of
Yeah,
niceness. He has to have like a weed gummy to have like a remotely like uncomfortable feedback conversation.
that's
He's
funny.
gonna be mad at me for saying that, but
My best boss was Canadian. It is Canadian, I guess, still. But yeah, I totally get it.
it's just a lot of smiling and head hunting. No, I got pretty good feedback about it. I mean, maybe people are being nice about my mean talk. But I think a lot of people came forward and said, I feel like I've made major missteps in my career because of this problem. And I don't know how to get the culture around me to change. The funny thing is the companies that actually like Morgan Stanley's having people watch this, they're already doing this stuff. So like, it's really hard to kind of break some of those cultural norms. But yeah, a lot of people came to me and said, I want to learn how to do this better. I can feel in myself these kind of brittle smiles, this anxious niceness. And I know it's not good. And I know it's more about me than the person I'm giving the feedback to.
Hmm.
It's about regulating my own anxiety and discomfort. And if you're honest with yourself, that's probably what's at the heart of it. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was surprised that talk went, it was a TEDx and then TED picked it up, and it got a lot, it's getting a lot of views. And I think people don't like that stuff. I think they're realizing it's not actually helpful. So I do think it's resonating with people.
How did you prepare in terms of like when you go up there to do something like that? Is there a routine, and I'm sure you've given other talks, but like, how do you
Yeah.
calm your nerves before you give a talk like that?
You know, that talk I was asked to give 5 days before I gave it. So I was actually
What?
like, yeah, I had no prep. Very little.
What happened? Did they like have a
I stepped
lineup and
in.
then somebody got like sick or something, or?
I think something like that happened. So I gave it at Columbia Business School. Adam Belinsky's a good friend and collaborator. And I remember being at the gym and him texting me and being like, any chance you can like come and give this like TEDx talk? And I was like, well, I'm going to Banff, Canada tomorrow, and then I'm back. And I pretty much had like less than a week to prepare for it. And then he put me in touch with
That's insane. If someone hits me up on a
yeah,
Monday and they're like, "Hey, can
no
you
one
give a
likes
TED
to
talk
hear
on
this story because
Friday?" You're like, "What?"
no one likes to hear the story because they put in like weeks and months of prep for TEDx. I put in 5 days. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
The day of, I took the photos that are in it with my lab and I went shopping and bought some clothes, like literally the day of. So, for me, if I try to over prepare, it never
Hmm.
really works. I wouldn't have agreed. I had no topic either. So that like between the asking and the showing up was something like 10 days total. Um, you know, I I think that when you do something like that, if you don't have like something that you think will resonate that you can deliver in a funny way, you should probably just say no. But I have this weird thing where I get nervous right before, but then right before I'm not nervous at all. And
Oh,
I did a lot of like dance recitals and showstopper dance stuff growing up. So I think I have a lot of experience performing, so I don't get super nervous. But people thought I was crazy. They were like, why are you agreeing? And I'm like, it's fine. It's just a TEDx. Who cares? There's like a million TEDx's. But then there was a lot of anxiety contagion going on in the room at the time because our sign had accidentally been crushed in this like giant trash compactor, and they had to like make new TEDx sign out of glass on like 4 hours notice. There's a lot of stressed out people, but that kind of stuff doesn't really stress me out that
Yeah.
much. I'm sort
How,
of a freak of nature that way.
but you have a lot of repetitions talking in front of students.
Students, I've been giving keynotes for a while. Student teaching, you just care that they're not falling asleep or just like shopping on their phones the entire time. But public speaking, you only get better at it if you do more of it. And
Yeah.
so I
Okay.
think it's just one of those situations. That said, there have been times where I've been put in front of a crowd to talk about something I'm not an expert in, and it's been like pretty painful and uncomfortable. So I try not to, go too much outside of my comfort zone, and I try to be as funny as possible. Otherwise,
Yeah. That's
it
cool.
doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine the younger students are, if you can keep their attention, that's probably the hardest group, right? To keep up and awake.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pivot back to your first book. And the thesis of that was how to deal with toxic coworkers.
Yeah.
Thank God you changed the title. Sounds like. What was some of the response that you received on that book?
Oh no, is this book about me?
Yeah, how do you give it to somebody? Yeah,
side.
that's funny.
Yeah, no, I think I got a lot of people coming to me crying and being like, you finally put a label to this person, this gaslighter or whatever. What's kind of surprising about Jerks at Work is the number of people who came to me who had been working for a really long time, who felt like they couldn't manage some like pretty low level interpersonal conflict issues at work. So yeah, I would do a lot of coaching or like these executive leadership things, and people would come to me and be like, yeah, like we're a team of superb coders and I've been doing this for 20 years, but there's like a little bit of conflict between these two people. And it sounded like pretty minor to me. And they would be like, I'm completely in over my head of how to handle it. I don't know how to get these two people to talk to each other who disagree. And so it occurred to me that no one gets trained on any of this stuff. Like we don't learn how to handle uncomfortable social interactions. We don't learn how to handle difficult people and people who talk over other people. We're skills trained. And so I think these like so-called soft skills, people now realize are important, but now they're just assuming you either have them or you don't. They're like an individual difference trait you can bring with them to work. And so the kind of in the zeitgeist now is these things matter. Some of us have them, some of us don't. Let's give people batteries of personality test to make sure that they're like good at reading others or they're good at conflict management. But I think that's all kind of misguided. I think all of these things anyone can learn, even if you're on the spectrum, even if you don't have empathy. They're just simple behavioral little, tricks you can do to kind of suss out problems before they get out of control. But yeah, the majority of the people coming to me with these problems have been working for a super long time, and they've been telling themselves it's all fine. Who cares? And now they're kind of realizing they kind of missed that day in school and need to go back and learn some of these skills.
I was looking at some of the call it like influencer reviews of your first book on Amazon. One of them being Scott Galloway. I'm wondering whether it be Scott or someone else who sort of put in that review on Amazon. Was there one person on that list that like their feedback really meant a lot to? Maybe it was just more than a blurb, but like they read it and gave you some really good feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest, I don't actually read, that stuff stresses me out. One thing that's kept me sane is I don't read comments on my talks or tons of these kinds of reviews, but the people
Yeah, I mean, I
in
guess
my
from your
industry,
peers, like was there a
yeah, like
peer of
Katie
yours? Yeah.
Milkman, for example, like
Yeah.
her opinion really matters to me. And she blurb job therapy as well, because she is an expert in her field. And she also is just like an insanely good collaborator. And so I know what she's like to work with. It's not just that she's a good writer, she's a Wharton, she's super well connected. She does these great kind of mega studies, but she's respected for her interpersonal skills as well. And so it's actually those people whose opinions, there's a lot of big deal people, especially in the business schools, but it's the people who I know are like tight, who are really good collaborators, and they're really good kind of thinkers and promoters of younger people, of their students behind closed doors when no one's watching. So, it's often those people like Charles Duhigg is another person who I like met randomly once, and he's been nothing but like super generous with me, giving blurbs and feedback, but also he's just really motivated to do work that's scientifically based. Like for his last book, I talked to him for hours and hours about findings, and he really just sticks to the science and makes sure that everything he says can be backed up, even if there's a sexier, kind of more interesting clickbaity angle. He never falls for that. That's not the
Yeah.
bait. And
I mean,
so
he's like
he's,
top 2 or 3 habit guys, right? Essentially.
yeah, like, and I think it's because he sticks with advice that's tried and true and not super sexy all the time. He doesn't tell you that you can do something if it's easier said than done.
Mm.
And everything is impeccably researched that he does. Like, there'll be a sentence in his book that he spent 15 hours researching just to make sure that it's right. And there's this funny thing that's now kind of happening in the trade book space. I talked to Anthony Appiah about this a little while ago, and he's like, no one fact check anything anymore, which is true. I have a ton of like quotes and stuff from people in my book. I've recorded them, I've transcribed them, but people, the editorial space, they don't fact check. So it's kind of on you as an author to make sure everything you said is backed up scientifically. And some people do it and some don't. And there's a lot of kind of BS out there. And
Yeah.
I just really respect the people who, even if no one will ever know Charles spent 15 hours, making sure that one sentence is right, he knows, and people like me know. And I think I have a lot of respect for people like that do the things behind closed doors that no one sees them doing, that makes their work solid and good and makes them good mentors and makes them good to work with.
That's really cool. And so what compelled you to write the new book, Job Therapy, Finding Work That Works for You?
Yeah, so I've spent 15 years at NYU teaching this close relationships class. Actually, I'm a trained relationship scientist. So before I got into studying, everyday interpersonal interactions, I studied marriages and couples in grad school. I studied things like dishonesty in romantic relationships. And this class, I've seen it evolve with these new generations. But one thing that I've kind of always noticed is all the problems that the students are bringing up, that modern literature is talking about, from how to go on first dates, to how apps are influencing our dating, to dishonesty, and what contributes to relationship disillusion. All these same themes were showing up in my career conversations with people. So like, I would teach this class at Columbia Business School for executive leaders, and they'd come to me and like, they pretty much sound like they're talking about a marriage, but they're talking about their career using the same weird language, like, I used to recognize it and now longer I don't, and I don't know who's changed. Is it me or it? And so I thought that kind of drawing these two worlds together would be a good use for people who feel angsty and emotional about their career, but they don't really know what to do with those emotions because they're told often to focus on structural decision making, hybrid work or in office or the size of the company and the compensation package. And we don't really know what to do with all these like kind of psychological problems or issues we're facing in these relationships with our careers. But I do think that kind of close relationships perspective can help. And then I'd say the other thing I noticed, and I did some interviews on this, is every weird trend you see in the workplace, like people ghosting or not showing up the first day at work. You see this occurring about a year before in the romantic relationship space. So people were not showing up on their Match.com dates. They were ghosting, they were simmering, they were icing, all those kinds of phrases that people like Esther Perel talk about. It was about like a year lag before people started doing those at work too. And I think a lot of our habits that we develop in our close relationships end up then kind of getting translated over to our relationship with our career. And they show up in the same kinds of ways. And so I think if we want to understand what people are going to do and why they do it, like, why not dig into that a little bit more?
It's interesting. I'm sure you've seen, even like, I think you talk about it a bit too, like the stressors that we experience at work spill into our personal lives. Like if we're at wit's end at work, we're probably not as patient with our kids come 5 o'clock or whenever. So that makes a lot of sense. There was something you said in I don't know if it's a chapter, as like your final thoughts kind of towards the end, I thought really kind of encapsulated what you just mentioned. And I'll kind of butcher this a little bit, but you said the only way to repair a fractured relationship is to take a step back and spend time evaluating how you got there. Right.
Yeah.
And so I love how you sort of illustrated that. It's like, you know, your relationship with your career is very similar to your personal relationships. And we have to take a step back in order to, you said something like, don't be forward thinking about this. Actually take the time to step back and do the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, I think it's really easy when we're in the moment to blame a lot of our discontent on the job or the economy or the boss or whatever. And it gets a little war of the roses. In our heads are like, there's actual career battles, right? Where we're like fighting at work, or this company's trying to recruit us and, they're fighting over us, whatever. But I think most of us are so forward thinking of, what do I do next? Do I take this next job? Do I go on this interview? Do I quit? That we don't just not apply to anything and just think, okay, what actually is my real problem? I think we're very like a little bit trigger happy with hitting that easy apply button on LinkedIn or wherever, because it's so easy to just always have our resume out there. And every recruiter I talked to was like, everyone's on the market. Don't say you're not. It's everyone can be bought for a certain price. So there's this idea that like jobs are not actually secure, that at any given time we can leave, but we don't take time to actually figure out like, why don't I like this thing and what direction do I want to go in? And a lot of people come to me and say, I applied for 500 jobs this week and I didn't get any. I said, you didn't get any because you applied for 500. That's
I
the
hear that
reason
all the
why
time. I
you
hear
got
that all the
none.
time. I'll tell
Yeah.
people, don't do that. Send me a list of 5 companies that you think you'd want to work for. I'm not saying you love,
Yeah.
but like send me that list.
Yeah. And
Rarely do
tell
I
me
get the
something
list.
about each company. Like these people that go on interviews, and every hiring manager I talk to is like, people know nothing about the companies they're interviewing for. They don't know when we were founded. They don't know how many people work here from when they were founded. They know nothing. It's like going on a date and you're like, haven't read the profile, like you don't
Yeah.
know who this person is. And they're all in like kind of sales mode, like, let me tell you about my skills, but they don't know how to kind of ask the right questions to information seek. And so Talia Wheatley, who's a professor at Dartmouth, has this great paper on like what makes a good conversationalist. It's not that surprising. Ask questions about the other
Mm.
person. Tell me about yourself and know things about them going in. And you need to treat the interview the same, like ask questions about the company, even tough questions like, why did the last 5 people in this role leave? I've noticed this is a bit revolving. That shows you've actually done research, but people are super lazy about that piece. They're all about just talking about themselves and what they can bring. And I think that comes from that 500 applications a day problem, where if you're going on 500 speed dates a day, you also would know nothing about each of these people, right? It's just like, tell me
Yeah.
about yourself is the first question you ask. And people are like, I don't want to tell you about myself right now. Like, can you ask me a question about me based on something you know about me already? But we're a little bit lazy that way.
It's interesting you mentioned that, not to validate myself, but I had this like Google Doc that I would share with people over the years, and it was like broken down into questions about the company, questions about the job, and questions about them. And you
Yeah.
need to, like, you can't skip any of these. It's all art and science, right? In terms of how the
Yeah.
actual interview goes and who you're talking with. And if you're talking to a recruiter, they don't always know the date, like the real like nitty gritty and why that person
They know,
left.
yeah, they know very little. They know almost nothing.
Yeah. You tell a story kind of near the end. I'm not saying you should rewrite the book and put this back in the front, but you tell this story about Trisha.
Yeah.
So, and let me know if you want me to jog your memory, but I thought this is like the perfect illustration about making career decisions using logic versus emotion. Can you share that story?
Yeah. So Trish went to grad school for school psychology, and it was a practical decision. And she actually worked in San Diego and was like making pretty good money, but she never quite felt like it was a good fit. And as a school psychologist, I think she kind of went in thinking she would do a lot of actual kind of more therapeutic work with like at-risk youth, but it turned out it just was more of a job about kind of testing kids. And kind of this really unique form of torture she faced was she actually interfaced a lot with people who did do therapy and who were on the more therapeutic side. And so she could actually kind of see in action all of this happening, this career she wanted that was just like right there, right in front of her, but it would require for her to make a major career pivot and importantly, go back and get a different degree. And so I think for someone like Trish, who at the time, she had young children, her partner was traveling a lot, She went through a lot of angst and a lot of guilt around getting into more debt for a different master's, right? It's not like the degree she needed could be built on in any additive way to the one she had. It was just like a different direction. Um, and getting through that kind of guilt phase, and she's guilt prone to begin with. She really had to kind of struggle with that emotional experience to do it. And I think a lot of us feel that way when we're making a career pivot that involves family sacrifice, time sacrifice. Little things like not being there for a kid's baseball game are sufficient enough to push people into the like staying in the misery category. I mean, you pull up that like schedule of your kids' sports and you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna miss this. I'm gonna miss 5 out of 12 games. I don't think this is the right time for this career pivot. But you know, at any given time, we can say that to ourselves. And so I think the guilt that comes along with these decisions is something that Trish really embodies a lot. And dealing with those kinds of roller coasters of emotions. She's also good because she had a lot of ambivalence, and she thought that ambivalence was a red flag that she's not sure. You know, and I told her, like, you're never going to actually resolve the ambivalence before you make the leap. That's actually a misconception that a lot of people have, is they're looking for certainty before they make the decision. Making the decision helps resolve the uncertainty, not the other way around. And I think she's a good kind of example of all those yucky emotions we feel, some of which we're a little embarrassed about. The other thing that she struggled with was coming back to work, getting another master's, being an intern, being like 10, 15 years older than everybody else. She felt silly. You know, these are like young college people, and she was, you know, in her late 30s at the time. And a lot of us don't want to say to ourselves, like, I feel silly being embarrassed about that, but I hate being the oldest person in the room. These are people I used to manage, and now I'm at the same level as them, and that sucks. That status drop sucks. And that's just a psychological experience that comes along with making a big career pivot.
And so did she eventually make that change?
Yeah.
And
She did, and
yeah.
she loves it. She's in telehealth, so she does therapy. She works with, you know, teens who are living in group homes who have done all kinds of things, from putting themselves into prostitution. You know, like,
Wow.
she loves the gritty stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Loves that difficult stuff. And I told her, I'm like, there are very few people who like this and who are good at it. You
Yeah.
know, who cares about like testing in school psychology? Like, you actually like something that most people don't, and you're good at it. And that should be, you know, a real kind of internal cue that you should follow. In her situation, she was passionate. So she was one of the lucky ones that actually knew what she was passionate about. Hurdles weren't, you know, ambivalence around that piece. They were just around all the other kinds of like day-to-day things.
I thought something interesting you said is, like, sometimes we think we're using logic when we're using emotion. Like, we kind of get the two mixed up. Do you see that often?
Well, we know from like research on motivated cognition that emotion and cognition, thinking and feeling, are not like, we don't have like two brains, right?
Right.
We use our emotions to inform our cognitions. And so, you know, that's why we have motivated cognition, is because our emotions actually guide how we process information, the justifications we come up with things. They can serve as a lens through which we view other people's behavior. So kind of the classic example of my work is, if you have anxiety going into a social interaction, that anxiety is like a pair of glasses that you put on, and everything that you remember or encode about your partner's behaviors are going to be consistent with your expectations. If you expect them to be rude, any sort of ambiguous nonverbal behavior, you're going to interpret as rude. You're going to remember the rude stuff. You're going to forget the nice stuff. And I think a lot of us think we're using logic when we are using logic words that are filtered through the lens of emotion, and we're engaging in motivated cognition to justify our decisions. Anyone who's ever been divorced and doesn't want to deal with, you know, refinancing a mortgage knows exactly what that is. Sounds logical. I don't want to refinance, but it's really emotional. You know, this experience of letting go of a home that you used to live in and so forth.
So what do you think is the difference between the person who might be frustrated at work and complain about it to their friends and family, versus the person who gets to the point where they're willing to take action? I don't mean, I guess applying for 100 jobs is one way to take action, but I think that is the worst thing you can do. And that could be a separate interview, is like just talking about like how to really get a job. But like, what's the difference between the two people who are like frustrated and the person who's willing to take the action?
I think it really comes down to this question of if I couldn't do this anymore, how would I feel about that? So I have this kind of forced choice question in the identity crisis chapter, which is at the end of the day, before you leave any relationship, you want to ask yourself, if I could never do this again, how would I feel? You know, like if
Mm,
God came down from a mountain and said, that's it, you are done. And if you don't know, then you probably aren't quite ready. I'd also say that this idea of kind of black and white readiness is a little bit of a myth. I think there really isn't a person who knows and a person who doesn't. You actually only get there after you go through like a couple stages of exploring your misery and networking. And I'd say the
yeah.
difference between those two people is one person has networked to figure out what else there is out there and put the time in to figure out, you know, what those other careers potentially look like, have spent, you know, 10 hours a week interviewing people, and the person who hasn't. And it's really not about a feeling, it's about the amount of time you've spent kind of trying to get clarity around potential other jobs or careers. So it's really more a time investment issue than a psychological one. I think the problem with kind of framing this question around, and this is a common question, one I think about all the time, is what's the difference between a ready person and not, is that there's some internal cue, and that's the difference. But I actually don't think there is an internal cue that tells one person, you know, sometimes, but by and large, there's not an internal psychological difference. There's, did I do the work to network to figure out if there's anything else out there for me, or did I not? And that's kind of like, it's more about the external behaviors than it is about this like being ready kind of feeling, because then we sit around and wait for it to happen. And just for most of us, we never get there.
Makes sense. There was like this Ali Abdal hack that he was talking about. He kind of checks in with himself. And if he's doing a task, and if he feels like he would rather fast forward to the end of his day, then that's something he needs to address. So is this thing that I'm doing, if I could fast forward this and get to the end of my day, would I rather do that than spend the next hour or two doing it? At least it's a quick way to check in with yourself, I feel like, and notice that like that's not a good sign. And we need to sort of expand on that.
I mean, I love that idea. I also think we're not really good at remembering how often we feel that way. So can I talk a little bit about this when I talk about measuring stress? Don't
Tell me
just
about
sort
that.
of like, yeah, don't just internally ask yourself like how often I want to fast forward, but when you do, mark it down and mark it down when you don't, and then look at the environmental cues that are kind of turning that on and off. I think one thing that I really learned in collecting data for this book is that we often are very bad at knowing the difference between what we think is going to stress us out at work and what actually ends up being our major stressors. You know, if I did a quick study where I asked people in the morning, what are you the most worried about? What are you the most stressed about? And then at the end of the day, what actually stressed you out? And there's about 50% overlap. Half the time that thing either never happens or it actually wasn't that stressful because you prepared it. But the other half the time, when people reported on things that were stressful, they weren't even really surprises. So they called them unanticipated stressors, but these are like, my commute was too long, my boss pushed something on my calendar that I didn't expect, or a deadline was pushed up. And then I'm like, well, how often have you experienced this thing before? They're like, 75% of the time it's happened. So we don't encode it. And I think, you know, part of this issue of like checking on your internal states is you need to write it down when you feel it, and you need to write down what else happened during the day, because we're very bad at knowing what turns those feelings on and off unless we actually collect data on ourselves. Our memories suck at this stuff. Like they're
Yeah.
just going to be consistent with our expectations, or we're going to be like, oh yeah, it was that day where the office was hot, or this person came in. And maybe that's true some of the time, but there's probably a bunch of other times you felt that way that you just don't remember because it's not consistent with what you expected to trigger it. And I think this is where people go wrong on the job searches. They don't know what actually stresses them out. They don't actually know what they hate until they collect data on themselves. And then they network and they search for jobs based on their own lay theories of themselves, but it's not data based. It's just like, you know, what in my head I think I ought to be stressed at.
Is it fair to say then like it's the stuff we don't anticipate that usually causes most of the stress? Because if you're like listing the things that you already expect. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I think expected stressors, most of the time, we're pretty good at actually preparing for. We put steps in place, you know, so some people had some kind of interesting stories like, you know, I dated this colleague and I knew I was going to see him and I was super nervous about it in the morning. And then at the end of the day, I'd say, okay, well, was that your biggest stressor? Well, no, because I got my friend to sit next to me, so I never had to actually talk to him. So they like prepare themselves for the thing, and then
Yeah.
it ends up being not that bad because we're pretty good at actually putting steps in place, or we practice that talk an extra time so it doesn't stress us out. But if you don't have time to prepare for a stressor and then it just kind of hits you, even if it's something you've experienced before, but you're just not good at documenting how often it occurs, like the commute, every time a person
Yeah.
comes in late and I'm like, you seem surprised that you hit traffic. Is this really the first time? This is, well, no, but like I can never predict it. I'm like, can. You're just not collecting the data to be able to predict it, right? Like whatever that
Yeah.
means to that person.
One of the most interesting things I did was like tracking my time. And I'm a fan of like Laura Vanderkam and her work.
Yeah.
And so like in the spreadsheet, I didn't use her spreadsheet, but like I put my every like 15 minutes or 30 minutes of like what I did that day. And at that point, it was pre-pandemic. So it included drive time. It included like time making PowerPoint slides and things like that. And like, so at the end of the week or the end of the day, I would look and it would spit into like a pie chart. And it was interesting. Like I thought I was doing, something 50% of the time, when in reality, I was only doing it like 20% of the time, but it
Yeah.
felt so. I do agree with that. Tracking is so important. I remember I saw a doctor once and I was trying to like kind of manage my stress better. And so I asked her like, how do we do that? Do I need to like take a blood sample or something? And she's like, well, you would need to spit in a vial, but you can't do it just at one moment in time because your cortisol, like it
Yes,
changes
diurnal.
throughout the day. So she's like, you're going to have to spit in this vial every hour, but let me
Yeah.
save you $300. I'm doing this test. Right. So I never ended up doing it, but it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, we don't know what stresses us out at all. And like I study physiology, I do this passive drool method to people too, where they have to sort of like drool into the vial. And we look at all these like biological indicators of stress. And, I have this great study with surgeons where they're doing transplants and we're looking at their physiologic reactivity. They have no idea that they look like they're running a marathon. It's 3 hours of, a heart rate at a marathon level. And you ask them how they feel, and
Wow.
they're like, I was calm and chill. And I said, well, did you ever, this is a weird question, but did you have to pee the whole time? Do you ever have to go to the bathroom? No, I never have to go to the bathroom when I do surgery. I'm like, that's because your parasympathetic system is completely shut down and you're in fight or flight mode like the whole time. So if you can feel it in your body, it's pretty bad, but most of the time stress indicators are pretty, up and running long before we sort of psychologically process them as such. And,
Interesting.
yeah, we just don't have great kind of like proprioceptive ability to tell when we're stressed.
Okay, let's hit on like the in one way to think about this is like, what is causing people to be unhappy at work. You call these sort of the five frustrations. I also want to know, how are you doing on timing? Do you have a few minutes?
Oh, I have plenty of time.
Okay.
Yep. I'm free
Um,
to whenever.
okay,
Yeah.
cool. So let's hit on these wherever you'd like to start. Because I think they're all important just to kind of like conceptually talk about and just to hear your sort of 2 cents on. We can start at the crisis of identity, but I'd love to at least kind of get your highlights on these and the significance of them, if that's okay.
Yeah, so the crisis identity is where I start. I kind of go with the most existential one first. This is the person who has spent, a lot of time and effort, often money, becoming an expert at something. And they tend to have, at least at one point, felt like their career identity is an important part of who they are. Whether they're still satisfied with that identity is kind of an important question for them. But these people are kind of waking up in the middle of the night, freaking out that maybe this isn't what they want to do for the rest of their lives. But they tend to be highly embedded at work, and they tend to have a lot of guilt and shame associated with these feelings. They don't quite know where they're coming from, but it's definitely the sense of this core piece of me no longer is bringing me the joy that it used to. And so they're having a complicated relationship with their career. The next one is the drifted apart. And I think they're also having a pretty complicated relationship with their career, but theirs is more this kind of slow bleed where one day they wake up and they don't recognize the job they used to love. And so the difference between them and the identity crisis person is they actually are nostalgic for the way things used to be. And they have a bias to think that it's the job that's changed, not them. A lot of people came back from the pandemic like this, kind of missing the office vibe, wondering why no one's engaged anymore, kind of blaming the world around them, or people who are struggling with kind of, you know, bringing generative AI into the workplace, or like, I don't recognize this weird job I hold. And so their kind of main journey is about figuring out how much they've changed and how much the career's changed and why. And I think what's fascinating there is I talk to people who actually are leaders and hirers, and they have a hard time seeing connections between big picture changes like restructures and the little ones like who's on your team. So often we see these kind of trickling down effects happening at work where there were layoffs or there's, you know, a merge or whatever. And we expect our leaders to tell us how that's going to impact our daily lives, but they actually don't even have much sense of that. And so understanding the nature of that relationship along with how much you've changed is important for these people who've kind of fallen slowly out of love with their jobs. Then from there, I talk about being spread too thin, which is just a chapter kind of for everybody. This is just, you know, this idea that you have one of two problems or both. One, you're taking on a million roles, some of which are good for your career, but many of which are not. And I think kind of the one mistake I see people make is they take on visible roles that get them, you know, pressing the flesh with people who have power and status, but they're like running employee resource groups and things like that. They're not actual status roles and they're not showcasing their actual skills, but they falsely believe they are because they give them photo ops for LinkedIn and things like that. And so for them, you know, figuring out how to, the less is more is important. And then the second part is just your task switching too much. And I think, you know, lots of people are now talking about, I'm thinking about like Cal Newport's slow productivity and how to figure out how to do this more efficiently. Almost all of us are like interrupting ourselves more than other people are interrupting us. So grappling with that reality is important. And then from there, I talk about the people who are in love with their jobs, but the jobs are not in love with them back. So, you know, the first one is the runner up, this person who just can't manage to close the deal. They're just always struggling. They're always in second place. And a lot of that is this huge communication gap between the people who promote and the people who are trying to get promotions. And kind of one fascinating data point from that chapter from the data collected is that even people who are successful at getting promoted don't really know why they got promoted. No one actually really told them what they did right. And so there's just these huge gaps about what we should be doing, what roles we need to have taken, and so forth. And then the last one is the underappreciated star. So a lot of us feel like we're stars, and a lot of us feel like we're underappreciated. These people are getting kind of pats on the back at work, and people acknowledge that they're good, but they're not compensated in the ways they want. And I think for them, knowing whether it's even an option to get that better compensation elsewhere, but also a really critical question that no one asks is, do people really care about having a star? You know, I am so good at my job, I'm the 99th percentile, but most companies are actually fine with the 90th percentile. They don't care about the best of the best because their comp packages are way too high. They'll take a step down and they're fine with that. And one of the reasons why these people are so angsty is because there's not a market for someone who has quite their level of expertise. Most companies would be fine with paying half the amount and taking a little bit of a step down. And so really interrogating the market and knowing if there is a market for stars like you is really important.
Wow. I think this is all about like, how do we, it's a lot of what you talked about, you know, we can be in our own heads, but unless we have like the awareness of these things and like sort of expanding on these things, or if I'm frustrated about my compensation, and if I have a certain skill set, to your point, am I actually, other than just going on Glassdoor or talking to one teammate of mine, am I doing my diligence around this area? You know, when you talk about the runner up, I've seen people firsthand who didn't get a next level manager or, you know, RVP type of a role, managing managers, didn't get selected and quit because of that.
We have a lot of pride, you know,
and they don't know why they didn't get the job, right? They don't know, they don't know why they didn't get it, whether it wasn't explained to them or vice versa. I feel like these are things that like people, I think one thing you said that like usually not one of these, you're not like one of these frustrations is usually not, it's not one thing. You could be like part of the identity, and then like maybe
you could be a lot of these.
Yeah. Interesting. How do you think about like risk tolerance when you think about people making career decisions?
Yeah, I think risk is important, but I think we're thinking about it wrong. We're thinking about the risk of leaving a job. So if you ask someone, what are the biggest risks involved of thinking about your career and changing, they say compensation or being uncomfortable at work or finding the wrong fit. And I'm like, well, what about the risk of spending 10 hours a week networking with new people to learn about something? Like, is that a risk? Well, like, no, not really.
Interesting.
What about the
Okay.
risk of like learning how to reframe your skills so they're more fungible, or the risk of taking the time of making the parts of your resume talk to each other? Like, what's the risk of learning new jargon? You're going to need to do that. What's that risk? It's not risky. So like most of the things you need to do to actually explore a new career aren't risky. But the thing that everyone freaks out about is quitting. That's risky. And I'm like, I'm not telling anyone to quit their job in this book. Like, you eventually might get there,
Yeah.
but you should not think of that as a risk. Like, by the time you're at the stage where you're applying for a new job, you should feel pretty certain about what you're doing, to the point where you've answered a lot, you've done a lot of homework, you've learned hidden curriculum, you've done so much work and so much research that taking the leap shouldn't feel like you're going into totally uncharted waters. And so I think people like immediately go from 1 to 10. They're like, okay, I'm secure, I'm going to quit, I'm not going to know anything or anyone, I'm not going to have a network, what am I going to do? I'm like, that's because you're thinking of jumping into the deep end, and that's the wrong psychological starting point for you. It's, leaving any kind of relationship comes with that kind of risk, but you should have spent a lot of time talking to a lawyer before you get a divorce. So
Yeah.
you know what a financial risk is. So it's not surprising to you when you have to pay alimony that you didn't see coming. Like, nothing should be a huge surprise by the time you get to that point. And so when people tell me this is too risky, I push back a lot and I say, tell me the risk of networking or reframing or this. And no one it's time consuming, but it's not risky,
Yeah.
So that's kind of my answer.
One of my mentors has this kind of concept, and he calls it he's like career square. I feel like I love just your opinion on it. If you think it's like kind of missing something, and he says at all points, the square needs to be congruent. And so like it's kind of an assessment. Think about it annually or from time to time. And so one of the edges of the square would be like work-life balance, right? If you
Yeah.
talk about burnout, eventually you're going to find something else, even if it's not your choice at that point.
Yeah.
One of the parts of the square is liking the people that you work with, right? If you have maybe a boss that's you don't get along with, eventually you're going to find something new. And then opportunity for growth is the other aspect of the square. If you hit a ceiling professionally, right, you're going to look for something else. And then also compensation, which we've hit on a little bit. If you're really sort of paid under market value, eventually you'll find something, or someone will find you. And then he sort of has passion in the middle, or at least liking what you do. But when you think of just like kind of like an assessment, do you feel like that's missing something in terms of checking in with yourself, maybe periodically, or what do you think of that?
No, I think those are good. I think, for me, I tend to look for like the underlying psychological pieces that underlie those things. So work-life balance, that's really about how predictable are your stress patterns and how much control do you have over that. Work-life balance tends to be more of a psychological state than a behavioral one. People like to think of it as a behavioral thing of like, I spend 4 hours here and I spend 10 hours there, but I actually don't believe in that, because we spend a lot of time at home perseverating on work. And so we're not actually in balance, even if we're not there. And I don't mean like time you're sitting, at dinner texting your boss. I mean, like, you're actually lying awake in bed thinking about the job, or you're stressed, or you're bringing that contagion home. And so you're still not in balance, even if technically your company gives you well-being Friday, right? If you're spending well-being Friday stressed about work, it's not well-being
Yeah.
Friday. So, I mean, for me, I think you want to kind of frame these in terms of like basic psychological experiences, certainty, predictability, clarity around the feedback process. So this idea of compensation and is there growth? This question of is there growth, you don't usually know the answer to that unless you have a really frank relationship with leadership at your company, because one thing a lot of leaders won't do is be honest with you, about whether every leader in the company has enough status to promote people. One kind of surprising reason why you're runner-up is because your boss doesn't have the social capital to put forth their direct reports. You're not going to know that unless there's total transparency around how raises are determined.
Yeah.
Another is that companies and bosses there are technically opportunities for growth, but you're too good at your job to promote you out of it. And there isn't a succession plan in place for people like you. And so they're going to hoard you, even though technically there is, so you need to know those kinds of things. And I think, so that is about clear communication, transparency and process, and procedural justice. Those are like bigger kind of nebulous psychological constructs that underlie all of these things. But I wouldn't get too hooked on like, just the behavior thing of work-life balance or the behavior thing of opportunities for growth, because they will always tell you there are, but then it's like, but are there really? Like, kind of one of the more surprising things I learned is that the social network you need in sales to be good at this region is completely different than the social network you need to be vice president of the North American division of the company. It's like small and deep versus broad and wide. But no one will tell you like, oh, your network isn't going to translate to VP of sales. So even if you're like the best in the region, you're never going to get that job because you don't have a network. We're going to hire externally someone who already has that network. So like weird little things like that can really interfere with your ability to grow, to move up. But the company website will be like, of course you can go from, regional best to VP. But until you kind of know that weird stuff, you're not going to know. So I'd say like, do the digging of like, is it really about the growth or is it about the communication gaps that prevent the growth?
I'll tell you, when I was working for that Canadian company, which was BlackBerry years ago, when people were using Blackberries, I almost took this job in Southeast Asia. So same job, and it just didn't make sense. The same job came open in Toronto, and like, we like kind of visualize, we didn't have kids yet, but we kind of like visualized ourselves like living there. You didn't have to learn another language. Just like really kind of maybe in love with the idea, and went through the whole interview process, and they were looking for relocation, all those things.
Yeah.
And I get a call and from the recruiter saying like they found someone to do the job who is making a lateral move, and there would be 0 ramp period for that person.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I thought to myself, and they said you did all the right things. Like you had the, sort of someone internal, like really, put their name on the line, endorse you, or so to speak. You did everything you could. I never knew that the ramp period was a massive factor. Like, and so I thought like, okay, you'd rather have 0 ramp than potentially someone who could do this job even better than that person, right? Or the previous person.
Need it done right now. They don't need it better in 6 months.
Yeah. And that's I mean, that is when you think of like head coaches in sports and things like that, right? Like they have to win in the next 12 months. I was talking to somebody who's job hunting, and they were about to talk to a recruiter, and it was that same concept. Like you gotta, think about like, the point of, I think part of the point of your book is like, you got to think about things that you're not thinking about. And those are underlying factors of all these things and how companies and hiring managers and recruiters make decisions. And you've got to be able to sort of maneuver around these situations to ultimately, find work that is enjoyable and that kind of checks the boxes that are important to you. Let me ask you this. What is career advice that you hear out there that you think people should ignore?
Oh, there's so much bad advice out there. Don't take a job until you find the right fit. You don't know what the right fit is. The right fit is going to be based on some peripheral cues, like the people were nice to me and the office is well lit and the onboarding was pleasant and, it feels safe. I think fit takes a lot of time to actually tell if it's established. I think that's a really important one. If you don't like it, you should leave within the first 6 months is another piece of advice I see a lot. Like that should be the trial period that everyone is kind of trying on a job. I don't know where this number came from, but I'm seeing a lot with Gen Z where they have like, they're pretty impatient with doing things like learning the hidden curriculum and getting over the newcomer hump. There's a lot of processes that I study in my lab, like being a newcomer in a team that takes a really long time for you to actually get enough status to get respected, even if you came in with it. So I think that's one. Another one is around kind of like respect and status in the workplace, and that it's pretty fungible, that if you've had it in your old job, you should have it in your new one. And what a
Mm,
lot of people don't realize is status is local. You can have prestige and you can have power coming into a job, especially if you are coming in at a pretty high level. But respect and admiration is an interpersonal trait that actually takes time to develop. And so people mistake power for status all the time. They think because they're in charge, that means people will respect them. But that actually takes a lot of time to grow. And you have to earn status. You don't have to earn power. People can hand you power. You can be a nepotism hire. You can be the son of the CEO and just be an idiot and have power. But that is very different from status. And then status is important for things like if there's a jolt in the workplace and all of a sudden teams are reorganized, so there are these kind of social constructs that take time to grow organically that you can't rush. But if you leave a job too soon in that kind of uncomfortable, I don't know the hidden curriculum, no one respects me here, I don't know anything stage, when you're still a newbie, for new career people, like that's just part of the process. And remember that some of these complex concepts like hidden curriculum, norm setting, and status take time to develop. They are not instantaneous. And if you don't have them right now, don't get frustrated. They do take some time to develop. So this idea of like, you'll know right away if it's a good fit. No, you won't. Because
yeah,
none of that kind of juicy stuff has grown,
good,
that
bad, and
actually helps you get ahead.
yeah, good, bad, and ugly. You'll find out in 6 months. Okay, let's say
Mhm.
you're talking to a group of 25-year-olds. They've been in their job for about 5 years, and maybe they're in sales, and they all have different degrees of sorts, right? Like nobody has a sales degree. And you're talking to them, and the goal of the conversation is for them to get clarity about what they want to do next, whether that be internal, external, different business unit, whatever. What advice
Mhm.
would you give those folks early on in their career, right? Out of college, in
Yeah.
there for about 5 years, to get more clarity about what they might want to do next? What 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you
Yeah.
give?
Yeah, my advice is pretty simple. Put down the book, stop reading the company websites. You need to talk to people, and you need to talk to people who have what's called non-overlapping information in social networks. And so our temptation when we want to learn about our career is to go to our friends and then to get a recommendation from that friend of another person to talk to who's also in that career. Tell me what your experience is like. Who else do you know who I could talk to? We call this snowball sampling in psychology, getting information from information. And it feels comfortable. And those conversations are going to go much more organically because you have similarity, you people in common. Stop doing that. What you need to do is actually network with people who work for different companies, who have different bosses and have completely different experiences. And you're going to look for the signal in the noise. And so all across all those idiosyncratic experiences, what do people have in common with what their day-to-day looks like? You have your own list of like skills that you're good at that you want to see are fungible, or tasks that you want to replicate or whatever. You want to talk to as many people as you can who have super diverse career experiences and look to see what they have in common. Because if you stick to people who are too well networked with each other, you're going to think that that's going to translate to you, when really what's in common is that they all have the same boss, or they all went to the same college, or they're all trained in the same way. And it's going to make you think that something's going to apply to you that's probably not. So network broadly with people who don't know each other at all. And I give you some guides of exactly how to do that, but it's a little bit uncomfortable to do. We like recommendations, but it's certainly possible.
I like it. Okay. Um, Are there any, like, if you just were kind of share some books, they don't have to be business books, but what are a couple books that you recommend that have an impact, have had an impact on you that you recommend other people read?
Um, Geez, this is hard. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are authors. Power of Habit is obviously amazing. I would probably say The Confidence Map is really good. I don't know if you know this one by Peter Atwater. Um,
I think I have it somewhere.
yeah, that one is
Yeah. Is it
good. It's
new? Is
not,
it kind of new?
Confidence Map's been out for a little bit.
Oh, maybe. Okay. Confidence
It's
map.
Not You, which is about narcissism in relationships. That came out last year. That's amazing.
My cousin just sent me that as he was going through some stuff, and he's like, he's like, to me, it's an important book. If you read it, I want to know what you think.
Yeah, no, it's really good. She has clinical experience. It really like it makes you understand the narcissist in a way that I think a lot of scientists don't talk about
Okay.
often. I also like reading interesting journey stories. So Claudia Durham, who's a physicist, wrote a book called The Beauty of Falling. So she studies gravity, but she's also a pilot, and at one point was going to be an astronaut. And so it's what I like about her book is she talks about complicated physics, but in a way that most people can understand. I like people who can kind of integrate weird worlds. I read a lot of fantasy, like in
Yeah.
my spare time. I don't read like a ton of work stuff. Next Job, Best Job is also pretty good. That one I like.
Have you read
You know,
Think Like a Rocket Scientist?
no, I don't know that one. Think Like a Rocket. That's an amazing title though.
Yeah, like Ozan Varol. I think he's was a rocket scientist. I know he does like a lot of writing and speaking now, but just one of those
Yeah.
like kind of had this expertise, right? The subject matter expert, kind of relating it to
Yeah.
business and life, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Anytime someone can take something complicated and make it, they can import and export knowledge to different
Yeah,
levels. I'm interested in reading it, not even just for the content, but like the skill. Like it's beautiful skill to be able to take something like explaining some super complex physics to a person who just knows what it feels like to be in an airplane. And I
yeah,
think so I look for
that's really
writers
cool.
who are able to do that. I also just read a lot of just guilty pleasures.
Yeah,
I'm not like super deep on my off time.
that's cool.
I'm reading Ice Planet Barbarians right now. So it tells you like where my
That's
taste.
funny. Are
Yeah.
one of the books that you listed one that you gift the most?
Oh gosh, I give so many books. The books I gift the most are like Three Body Problem. There's like people want those books. Everyone is stealing my Cal Newport book right now, Slow Productivity. Anything AI
Yeah.
related, the algorithm, I gift that one a lot.
It's called The Algorithm.
Algorithm, and I think that one's really good if you want to understand how algorithms are used in hiring. So it's like all about how like LinkedIn Recruiter uses algorithms to figure out the top 50 and things like that. So anything that journalists write that are like pretty good deep dives, I'm a big fan of. Women, Money, Power is another really good one that I would recognize or recommend for people. Yeah, it's hard because I get a lot of books in the mail and I'm always jealous. I read them, I'm like, that's better than mine, but who cares? That's what happens. And then also I do the thing you do where I always read the acknowledgments. I'm like, oh, who do they acknowledge? That's like the
Yeah,
gossip part of the book. Yeah.
that's funny. Well, to me, I think of like, um, you know, if you're interviewing somebody who wrote a book, you can do the thing where you ask the person to divulge. It's like a book report on audio, and to me, that's like
Mhm.
the most annoying thing in the world. And so I try to think about it like I try to think about the listener first, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are they going to get out of it? And then I also think about, is the person on your end going to enjoy it when you leave? Because you're going to have an emotion when you're out of these interviews. I know you're going to do like a ton of these, and you're either going to get out and you're going to feel like it was energy sucking, or it gave you energy, right? Like one of the two
Yeah.
typically. And mostly you won't even remember half the stuff you talked about because it's like the same subject and whatnot. But I do think of that. Like, is this person going to
That's
leave
good.
thinking they had the same conversation 100 times, or maybe it was a little different? I was talking to probably your friend Kim Scott, and
Yeah.
she was, and this to me was like the biggest indirect compliment. She, like, we were running out of time. She's like, I don't know what I'm doing next, but this is more fun, so let's keep going.
Yeah,
I
totally.
was like, wow, like that to me is like those little things, like in those little conversations, like those are the
Yes.
things that like I'll never forget. um I don't know why we're talking about this, but
Yeah, but I
yeah,
feel like
those,
when I talk to you, I feel like we could be like at a bar or something. Like it's not an interview, it's a like
yeah,
you're a really good conversationalist and you ask unusual questions about like my dad's job and you know, I think no one asks those kind of personal questions, but most people actually care about what the author did to get here, you know? And I like your idea that doesn't need to be a book report. I think that a lot of people who are new at this job do that. I don't know if you maybe had an interesting career trajectory where it took you a while to get comfortable with like asking those kinds of questions that when you first started, you were like, please give me a synopsis of
Yeah, no, I mean,
your latest adventure.
if I listen to myself early on, definitely, I do like to learn from other interviewers. And so like some of those funky questions, I've kind of borrowed from other people. I also think like you have to, at some point, you have to earn the questions that you ask. And so one of my friends was interviewing, his name's Ryan Hawk. He's the host of Learning Leader Show. He's done like 500 plus interviews. And he was talking to, I think it was General, was it not McCraven? It was the guy that Obama fired, basically. Because
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I forget, McChrystal, it was General McChrystal. And he got to a point and he was like 45 minutes in or something like that. And he asked him about like basically what did Obama say, or like how'd you feel or whatever. And it was just one of those
Yeah.
questions where you could have had an interview with him and never asked that because he felt like you were tiptoeing.
Yeah.
You could have asked it in the beginning and it would have been it could have led to a terrible interview.
Yeah,
And
he would have been like, whoa, there's
who is
no
this
foreplay in
guy?
this interview. Like you're jumping right in.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I interviewed like Mike Tyson once, and I probably did the bad thing of watching all these interviews that went, like one of my friends said, here's the interviews that like gone bad. It's on YouTube. And this was in person. And I got like really nervous, like
Yeah.
physically before the interview. I was like, I almost went blank. I didn't know what to ask.
Yeah.
But I had seen some interviews where this guy would ask him really, there weren't even fair questions. Like, what are you trying to learn from him? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? Like, knowing that he blew $50 million, like we all get it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I do think like, the timing of those types of questions, for like General McChrystal was like, he earned it, and it was like the right timing to ask it. And
Yeah.
not like, it was just well played. And just in terms of like the actual interview itself, it turned out to be a good thing. But I do think about like, how can the person benefit from listening to it, because that's the most important thing, is the audience. And then
Yeah.
if you're actually not bored, it's going to be a better interview. And maybe there's another book or something, and the next time you're going to think like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, is this like another one of those, I have to give a book report, can you just listen to my Audible?
I know. I'm like, the person reading my book has got a way better voice than me. Just do the Audible. But like, I
Yeah.
think this is interesting because you asked me about my TED, and kind of one of the worst pieces of advice that people gave me was watch everyone else's TED and figure out which ones made it big and then try to emulate that. And I've actually like never done that in my life, where I watch a successful person and then try to like copy what they did in any way, because then you're just inorganic about the whole thing. Like a million people came up to me after and were like, whose did you base yours on? I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, whose TED Talk? Like your strategy, your blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, zero people's. I actually don't watch TED Talks, like ever. I've never watched one. I've
Yeah.
never even seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk.
That's funny. I
Like,
think I watch hers after like 10 people send it to me. But like, if you add, like, to me, they're all kind of like snowflakes. They're not like textbook how to write a sentence or how to write a story. Like one guy, Rick Elias, it's like one of the first TED Talks, wrote about like 5 things or 3 things he learned when his plane was crashing. Like,
yeah.
how do you can't just duplicate that
And I can't
experience.
compete with that. My plane didn't
Yeah.
crash.
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah. And so like when I think about like the best TED Talks I've seen, Sir Ken Robinson, about like the education system, like those are just snowflakes. Like
They're just random and you don't know why. They just ended up being good, but they just did.
yeah. The more authentic, like I was interviewing James Clear not long ago, and it got like 10-15 minutes in, and I was like, all right, James, like, I was always like asking for a friend. And then finally I was like,
Yeah.
here's the situation, James. What do I do about this? And then at the end of the conversation, I was like, all right, let me know where to send the check. The check will be in the mail. Thank you for the therapy session.
Yeah.
And he's like, only send it if it actually helps. But I felt like the more authentic, I don't want to hijack an interview, but like the more I can kind of make it authentic, the more it'll, like, the listener will notice, and the more authentic it gets. So like, how do you, I don't know. I just think of those things. And this is like, to me, this is the topic I talk about all the time. And so it's nice to talk to somebody who studies this. Cal Newport's great. I'm just looking at some of these books I need to be reading, but like they come from different angles. If I'm talking to someone about Cal Newport and I'm doing a productivity interview, that's been done 100 times. Like that's
So many times. Productivity
be,
porn, man. It's the most
yeah.
common porn out there.
So if
Like
I ever
it's
talk to Cal, it's got to be, it's got to be productivity and how does that impact your career, or maybe you as a dad or something, like, you know, parent or something. I have to bring it into that through that
I mean, I
lens.
would ask him, because I've been following his career for a long time, like, are you really still like as academic? You know, he sort of paints himself as like doing both, but his
Yeah.
academic career is kind of dried up. And like this is a contentious thing that like you can't say to someone, but it's like, can you really like
It's the
win
identity. It's
this
the identity piece
game?
that you said earlier, right? Is Ali, he
Yeah.
was a doctor, but he's really not, right? Um, I asked James, like I was trying to ask this in like a conducive way, but like you've sold 20 million copies of your book. It's sold like 5 times faster than, you know, you've reached that number than like the 7 habits of highly effective people. How do you not
Yeah.
just, how do you not just sit back, right?
And do dick all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you not fall into the complacency trap?
Yeah.
So those are things I do kind of wonder, like he could study nothing and just like, you know, like to me, it's fascinating because not everyone has that sort of whatever Kobe Bryant mentality of like, you know,
Yeah. Like go, go, go.
yeah, no matter if I've had success or whatever. So it's fascinating. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you leaning into this. This is a lot of fun, and
Worse. Yeah.
appreciate you trusting me to help kind of spread the message. If I missed anything, let me know. Definitely, I can try to weave it in.
No, I think this is great. And thank you for letting me talk about my daddy issues. I'm like, oh, my parents were
uh,
fucking disasters.
I will tell you, you know, it's funny is, so like when I took like a video course to like set up video and stuff, and the guy became a friend of mine. He like teaches this course. His name's Kevin, and we did an interview because it was a lot about like how do you make your setup look good and all that stuff. But we talked about his parents, and then he asked me the next day. He texted me. He's like, "Can you take that first part out?" And I'm like, "That's like the first 15 minutes."
You're
Talking about
like, it wasn't first. It was like 90% of it.
Yeah. So like if you listen to it, you wouldn't have thought he said anything crazy, but it is very personal, right? And so I do think there's most people don't get asked that question. They might get asked by their friends, but they usually don't get asked about it while you're recording. But yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, my parents were in the restaurant business. And so like I was used to going into small rooms while they were working and just like with my siblings and hanging out. And so like, yeah, I feel like everyone's upbringing has to influence them in some way, shape, or form, whether it be, I don't think it's good or bad or indifferent, but
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you leaning into it.
Of course, in academia, I'm like the only child of a construction worker. You know, half my colleagues have like professor parents or Nobel Prize winning parents. I actually feel really lucky that my parents aren't great, because I would have like major aspiration, I'm not good enough issues if I came from that. I prefer coming from a blue collar background where, yeah, it took me a while to learn the stuff, but at least I'm not like, well, you're never going to live up to your Nobel laureate father. Like, I can't imagine feeling that kind of pressure. Like, that sucks.
I have met people whose parents were professors and they went to Ivy League schools. And it sounds like they turned out fine. You mentioned Morgan Stanley. Have you met Carla? She's an author.
Carla Stark?
Is that Carla
I think I
Harris?
know who you're.
Carla
Carla. That
Harris.
sound. No, I don't think I know her.
You should look her up because if
Okay.
do you work with them at all still or no?
No, not
Okay.
really. But I'm connected to a lot of people still, like on LinkedIn and stuff like that.
She's like, I think her book was published by Penguin. Um, and I always, if I see the Yale or whatever, like I do ask oftentimes, and it's like, did you have Ivy League aspirations?
Yeah.
And so she was at Morgan Stanley. I probably does like a lot. She does a ton of keynotes. You could just like, if you follow her on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
her book's good. I mean, it's basically career advice. She calls them pearls of wisdom, and she's like a force of nature. Like you get to talk to her, like she's the real deal. But yeah, I mean, when I asked her that question, it wasn't like she was offended, but she's like, "Are you kidding me?" Like in it, and it was like this 90-second like motivational. Nobody told me to apply at any Ivy League schools. even though she got into, I forgot what school it was, she got in full ride. Once she got into Harvard, she opted to work like 3 jobs to pay through herself, like through school
Yeah.
and for school, versus taking maybe another school that was like pretty good, but not as like maybe, as popular as Harvard. Uh, yeah. So it's those types of like responses to me and kind of things you can find out.
Yeah. Like you think people like had it easy, but she's like, are you kidding? I had
She was the
19 jobs.
opposite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You said
They're
you
not
had
all
3 jobs
legacy
in
admits.
college too?
I've been working since I was 14. I've been paying
Okay.
taxes since I was like 14. This is how old I am. I worked at Hollywood Video in high school.
That's
I
cool.
did all the things. I sold men's shoes at Nordstrom's for a very long time in Santa Barbara, where the men had money and it was commission based.
Oh
But
yeah.
yes, I had a million jobs. And my parents actually like declared bankruptcy and got a divorce when I was in college. So all of a sudden, like I had
Oh
to pay
yeah.
for my own stuff kind of mid freshman year. Yeah, so I definitely know what that like grit and feeling a little bit out of place in the university setting is like. NYU is a rich school, and I went to just all public school before that, Santa Barbara, then University of Connecticut. So, it's definitely a different world.
Is it
You
attached
know,
at all to like NYU Langone? Is that where like you have your medical system is
they're sort of attached, sort of
okay.
not. So they kind of like run in parallel. I have a lot of colleagues over at Langone.
Oh, okay.
There's some centralization, but most of it is kind of, siloed off between the
Okay.
two places. Yeah.
My uncle works
I've
there.
had
That's why I
colleagues
asked. I
go
was
over
just
to
curious.
Langone though.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
My uncle
Yeah.
works in technology over there.
Nice.
Cool. Awesome. Well, let me know if you think of anything else. Looking forward to putting this together. If you have any questions, just ping me. But again, great meeting you.
Great.
Congrats. I know the
You
book is like a
too.
month away from like actually publishing. So I'll try to get
Can't wait for just to be there.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like being pregnant, I imagine. It's just get the baby
You're
out.
right. That's exactly what it's like.
I'm just imagining. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, Tessa. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you so
Talk
much.
to you. Bye.